Welcome to the Left Shew Politics Podcast. This is Rick Shew, and here's my conversation with GOP strategist Matt Mackowiak. I would like everyone to welcome our special guest today, Matt Mackowiak. He's a GOP strategist and founder and president of the Potomac Strategy Group. Matt provides political analysis for the Fox News Channel, MSNBC, ABC, BBC, and much, much more. Welcome back, Matt, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, it's my pleasure. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much. So listen, it's been kind of a crazy week, man. The first week of the Trump presidency. And by the way, your new podcast is great. You want to plug that real quick for everyone?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. I do have a national politics podcast in partnership with the Washington Times newspaper. It's called Mac, M-A-C-K, on politics, maconpolitics.com or on iTunes.
Awesome. Yeah, it's really good stuff. So anyway, I've been listening to your show. I saw you on Chris Hayes the other night, reading your op-eds and everything. So I have a feeling about where you're standing on everything. But just for our audience right now, if you could recap this first week of the Trump presidency, how would you categorize everything? How do you feel about it? What do you think is the highs and lows?
I think it's fair to say I don't agree with everything he's doing, but I think it's also fair to say that nothing he's doing should be a surprise. You know, it's one of the interesting things about politics. When every once in a while an elected official actually does what they say they'll do, it makes news. Ted Cruz did that in his first 2 or 3 years in the Senate, and everybody went crazy. And so now that Trump is going through, particularly with the executive orders, and doing exactly what he said he'd do when he ran for president, it's obviously causing a lot of people, particularly on the left, to not take it very well. Look, I think it's also fair to say that he's had a little bit of a bumpy first week. I mean, I thought there were some very good moments. From a substance standpoint, I agree with, the vast majority of the executive orders. But, obviously, he's got, 4 cabinet secretaries have been confirmed? Obama
and overwhelming support from Democrats as well, we might add. I mean, it's kind of remarkable, really.
Well, the ones that have gotten through, yeah. I mean, these are the least controversial ones. But you're right. I mean, Mattis and Nikki Haley both had over 90 votes. But my point is just that Obama had 7 the first night he went to sleep in the White House, and he had 11 or 12 by the end of the first full week. And Trump's sitting there with 4 cabinet secretaries, one of whom lives in New York City as the ambassador to the United Nations. Look, I think he's going to have the whole cabinet in place in the next, let's say, 3 weeks. I think every single one of them is going to get approved. What matters now is going to be his legislative agenda. And as far as I see it, they've got 2 ways to move legislation in the next 2 months. Obviously, there's a reconciliation bill, which is a budget, effectively a budget. That's what they're going to use to repeal probably most of Obamacare, if not all of it. But there'll be other things in there as well. But then they also have a debt ceiling increase that has to happen, I think it's before mid-March. And so that's a must-pass vehicle. My guess is they'll attach things to that as well. But look, this is the biggest challenge Trump is going to face is that the Senate threshold to pass legislation is still 60 votes. The reconciliation is 51. The debt ceiling would be 60. But everything else is going to require 60 votes. And so tax reform, rebuilding the military, I mean, all those things are going to take 60 votes, and you've got 52 Republicans in the U.S. Senate. So we really are going to see exactly how good a negotiator Donald Trump is pretty quickly here, because he's either going to be successful in finding ways to get 60 votes in the Senate, or he's not, and that's going to go a long way to determining whether his first 2 years are successful or not. Now, I would add one last thing, and that is we expect next Thursday, February 2nd, he's going to announce his Supreme Court nominee, and I think that is going to cause a major political fight on Capitol Hill. My expectation is the Senate Democrats will oppose almost to anyone he nominates as a way to sort of pay Republicans back for blocking Merrick Garland. I think fundamentally replacing a Scalia, who's a conservative, with another conservative doesn't change the balance of the court. So my guess is that's not a sustainable position for Senate Democrats. But it's going to depend a lot on who they choose, what their background is, how the Senate Judiciary Committee confirmation hearings go. But that's going to be a big fight that consumes 2 months probably on Capitol Hill. But look, I mean, Washington, D.C. can't handle multiple fights at the same time. They can barely handle one major fight at the same time.
Right.
And so I think there is going to be a little bit of overload here in the next couple months.
You alluded earlier to Obamacare, and I know that we've talked in the past, and you've always been a proponent for repeal and replace. And that was one of the things that you said, hey, there's some silver linings to Trump getting elected. Obviously, that was one of them. And that's all fine and well. I'm for anything personally that makes this whole system better. I think Obamacare, as someone who supported him twice, I was never necessarily a cheerleader for Obamacare. I know some people that it helped directly. I know them personally, and God bless them. I'm glad it did. I also know people that it really screwed over. And so it's been, my view on Obamacare was always, hey, listen, what basically essentially happened is it brought in a lot more people to a screwed up system. It didn't change the system. In fact, by virtue of bringing in that many more people, it made it worse. So that's where I've always stood, just to recap that. Now, here's my fear, and then I want to get your thoughts on this if you don't mind, is that I'm fine with a repeal and replace if there's a replacement. And then we have leaked audio that's coming out right now that's showing the disarray behind the scenes with the Republican Party. And I'm curious, Matt, do you think that there is something truly on the table they have to replace this thing? And how do you foresee this all playing out?
Yeah, it's a great question, and look, this is extremely complicated. And one of the really dishonest things people say is that Republicans have no replacement plan. It is true they do not have a unified consensus plan. There are 6 or 7 very serious, very thoughtful plans, most of which have been put out by the Republican doctors who are in Congress, people like Michael Burgess of Texas, Tom Price, the HHS Secretary Designee, John Barrasso from the Senator from Wyoming, who's a doctor. So a number of those members have their own replacement plans. And of course, just like Obamacare, I mean, anything you do in healthcare has winners and losers and makes choices that advantage some people and disadvantage others. I think the single biggest question facing the replacement opportunity is the following. You have 3 very popular but very expensive provisions that are in Obamacare, right? The guaranteed issue provision, which takes away blocking people from getting health insurance due to pre-existing conditions, the opportunity for kids to stay on their parents' plan until they're 26, and then the end of lifetime caps within health insurance plans. Those 3 things are all very popular among consumers because they're very good benefits, but they're also very, very, very expensive. And the only way the health insurers were willing to accept was to have an individual mandate that required people to buy health insurance if they didn't already. And so therein, I think, really lies the problem. Therein lies the rub. How do you get rid of the individual mandate, which conservatives generally oppose, and still have those popular provisions in place, which people are going to want? Look, I think the simplest way to understand Obamacare is if you had health care, Obamacare is basically bad for you. It's certainly not good for you. It's either bad for you or neutral. If you did not have health insurance when Obamacare was passed, there's a pretty good chance Obamacare was good for you. I think it took, basically cut the uninsured rate basically in half, I want to say, in the United States, covered an additional 20 million people. Now, I think 16 million of those are on Medicaid. So you literally could have just expanded Medicaid nationally and saved, 900 of the 1,000 pages in the bill and all the cost, all the tax increases and done that. So, look, I think it is true. And, of course, we saw this, the tape you're alluding to is in the Washington Post story, I guess it was yesterday, that Republicans are discussing this privately and are trying to decide what the right path forward is. There are 3 or 4 major choices they have to make. They all have good and bad repercussions based on the policy choices they make. The person who I really trust most on Obamacare is a policy expert named Avik Roy. He actually pronounces it Ovik, but it's spelled A-V-I-K. His last name is Roy. He was at the Manhattan Institute for a very long time. He is now running his own think tank called the Foundation for Research and Equal Opportunity. He has his own replacement plan, which he actually thinks will be the plan at the end of the day. He works closely with Speaker Ryan and others. And so that's the one that I'm really watching, and I don't know all the plans well enough to tell you the differences, but, I think he is someone that really understands Obamacare backwards and forwards, understands what is possible. But I think the last thing I'll just say on this, Rick, is right now Democrats have no interest whatsoever in being part of the debate surrounding replace. I think there's a calculation that Republicans on the Hill are making, which is once the bill is entirely or primarily repealed, the Democratic calculation will change.
Right.
It will change from stop repeal from happening to now that it's happened and we're mad about it, we're going to now try to be part of making sure replace is as good as it can be. I think this is all happening at a time when 25 Senate Democrats are up for re-election in 2018, 10 of whom are running from states that Donald Trump won 2 months ago, 4 of whom are running from states Donald Trump won with 56% or more. So political reality is going to set in for some of these Senate Democrats. I think that's going to be a big part of how Trump has a pathway to starting to get 60 votes on a lot of these thorny issues.
It's almost making my head spin. It's just this has been the most intense week I've seen in years. And and you know what, perhaps even in my 42 years on this planet. Okay, so Matt, I have one last question for you. So your friend Hugh Hewitt the other day was on, and forgive me, I can't remember which program it was, but I heard the sound clip, and he was talking about President Trump better hope that that Democrats never take control again during his tenure as president. And the reason being is that he is already skating on thin ice from a constitutional standpoint with his conflicts of interest and whatnot. So I'm going to tie this into my last question for you. With that said, and then you talked about some things that you liked in this first week. What do you think is what is the thing that worries you the most, and what do you think of those comments from Hugh Hewitt, if you could tie those in together for me?
First of all, I don't have a lot of fear the Democrats are going to take back Congress or the Senate.
Unfortunately, you're probably right.
Yeah, certainly not in Trump's first term. But look, if Trump's first term is a disaster, I think in 2020 they could take the Senate back, certainly. The House, I think, is gone for a while, but who knows? I mean, we never thought 2006 would bring in Tom Daschle and Nancy Pelosi. We never thought 2010 would bring in, John Boehner. So, these swings do happen, and they happen, in ways that we cannot always predict. The emoluments clause is pretty clear. I have a difficult time seeing how a foreign government renting booking a couple rooms at a hotel truly can be classified as a bribe. I mean, when you think about, what amount of money actually goes into Donald Trump's pocket, once it's run through that entire hotel and that entire system, it's probably a very small fraction. And as Trump's legal team said when they did the press conference, is the standard that he has to sell every real estate property. That he would probably have to take on new debt to do that, potentially to get those deals done quickly. And so there was no clean option. I wish they'd found a cleaner option than they did. The courts may ultimately work through these issues. I think the lawsuit that Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, which is a Democratic front group, filed, is really about discovery. It's not about an outcome. They're not going to have standing. So I don't think that lawsuit's going to go anywhere, but I think they do want discovery as it relates to his taxes and things like that. Now to your bigger question about what worries me, look, obviously I don't have a lot of happiness that there are visa holders and green card holders who cannot get back into the U.S. as we sit here.
Right.
That bothers me. That worries me. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't. They should have found a way to do this in a much more thoughtful way. I do think it is reasonable to take a pause from countries with a history of terrorism until we can figure out how we put a more robust vetting procedure in place. This is not, Steve Bannon's idea. This is based on Director of National Intelligence James Clapper testifying under oath to Congress 6 months ago that the databases do not exist in Syria to adequately vet the refugees. And when you add to that the fact that ISIS has said on the record they intend to infiltrate our refugee resettlement program to come to the United States, that's got to give you pause. So I'm not anti-Muslim. I'm radical Islamic terrorism. I think most Americans are. And so,
most Muslims are, for that matter. I mean,
sure,
right.
Absolutely.
Right.
And so, and look, most Muslims are not radical Islamic terrorists. So, yes, there probably was a better way to do this. Part of it, I think, is he doesn't have all his cabinet secretaries. He's issuing executive orders without his cabinet secretaries. But he's not a patient man. He's not going to wait around for Democrats to tell him when he's allowed to have cabinet secretaries confirmed. He's going to move forward on these promises. Now, the thing that does worry me the most is if he, my understanding is as we sit here on Saturday, he is going to speak with President Putin of Russia this morning with Vice President Pence on the phone. If that were to result in President Trump canceling the sanctions that the Obama administration put on Russia in the closing 6 weeks of their administration, I think that would be a terrible, terrible thing. I think Congress and Senator John McCain, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, said he believes Congress would overturn that decision rapidly. I presume he means with a veto-proof margin because that is what would be required. President Trump said yesterday in the press conference with Prime Minister May, he was asked about sanctions on Russia. He said he's not going to do anything anytime soon. So my guess is he's holding that as a negotiating point with Russia. I think my honest belief here, Rick, is that he has learned some things about Russia in the last month that have given him pause. I truly believe that's the case. The President's Daily Brief would have very discouraging information in it. Cybersecurity, hacking information would have very discouraging information in it. I don't have any concerns about his national security team, with the possible exception of Michael Flynn. I think that I actually think Tillerson sees Putin for what he really is. I certainly think Secretary Mattis at defense sees him for what he really is. I think our CIA Director Pompeo does as well. So I'm generally encouraged that he's got good, smart, experienced, sober people around him that will be advising him on these issues. But if he were to issue, executive order or pull back those sanctions against Russia, I think that would be a hugely discouraging move from President Trump. I think it would cause tremendous controversy, and I think Capitol Hill would move with immediate actions to rebuff him. And I think in some ways that would poison the relationship he has on Capitol Hill, would even probably make it harder for his legislative agenda to move forward. My guess is that he is being advised not just from the cabinet officials he has in place, but also by top Capitol Hill leaders in terms of the committees and the leadership about reasons not to cancel those sanctions. Now, those sanctions in and of themselves were not going to change Putin's behavior. They were pretty weak. He expelled some diplomats. He froze some assets of some of Putin's friends. We've actually got to go pretty far beyond that, and that's something Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina has talked about, really going beyond those sanctions into a much, much tougher posture. So I think that is where this is likely headed. If Trump decides not to pull back the sanctions, I think Capitol Hill's going to have to decide whether they want to go further, and they're going to have to see whether they have, number one, majority support in both houses to do so, which I suspect they do, but whether they have veto-proof majorities, because it's not clear to me Trump wants tougher sanctions at this point. He's probably right now trying to decide whether pulling back sanctions is what he wants to do. My hope is he doesn't.
Likewise, I think the Kremlin would look at that more as a sign of weakness than diplomacy, and I think that's a bad thing.
Well said.
Yeah, yes, sir. Look, man, I know your time is precious. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show, and you and I meet in person here in a couple of weeks at my bar, and I'm looking forward to that.
Hey, me too. And listen, I'm thrilled to be a third-time guest on the Left Shew podcast. I always enjoy these appearances. Keep up the good work, and we'll talk to you later.
Matt, you're the best. Thank you, sir. And that was my conversation with Matt Mackowiak. I am joined today by my co-host, Michael Malloy and Jeremy Grokley, and our very, very special guest, Zaki Hasan. Zaki is a professor of communications and media studies. He's also the co-founder of Mr. Boy Productions and a Huffington Post film critic, my personal favorite, and my pal, Zaki. Zaki, how are you, sir?
Good morning. How's it going?
Well, very well, thank you. So, Zaki, you always have something great to plug. You want to do that real quick, man? What do you have going on?
Got a fun new episode of the Diffused Congruence podcast that I co-host with my friend Pervez Ahmed. This is the American Muslim Experience, and you guys might like this. We interview Zaki Barzinji, who was the Muslim American community liaison under the Obama administration, and so he just vacated his post last week to nobody, because that position obviously will not continue under the Trump administration. But fascinating interview. It's about an hour, and you can find it on iTunes. I think you guys will really enjoy it.
I'm all over that, and I'll tell you what, that just set up for a great segue. The first topic today is President Trump. It's hard. I'm getting there. Trump's.
It gets stuck in the throat a little bit.
It just kind of gets stuck in there, right? But anyway, President Trump's refugee ban, Muslim ban. Oh, gosh. I don't even know where to even begin with this. I want to say this. Have you guys seen Dick Cheney's comments on this? Anybody?
Well, so I saw comments that he made in 2015, which is a quote that's gone viral. As far as I know, he hasn't commented on anything presently.
It has gone viral, and it was a year or two ago, but essentially talking about on the Hugh Hewitt show that this goes against everything that we stand for and believe in. And this is essentially when Trump was first introducing the idea of a Muslim ban when he was running for office. So my guess is he probably still feels that way. I mean, I'll give the Bush administration credit when it's hard for me to, but let's give credit where credit is due. After 9/11, Bush went to visit a lot of mosques and talked about Muslim Americans being our brothers and sisters, and was very humane in that way. And that's not something I ever see President Trump doing, and I could be proven wrong. But it just goes to a larger picture here of who we are as people, not just as Americans, right? But as just people. And I just find this almost brought me to tears yesterday. And to recap, so everybody understands what's going on that may not be following the news, and heck, maybe we're your news today, is that President Trump is actually following through with his Muslim ban, right? We can spin this, but this is basically what he's doing. He's banning Muslims from entering this country from 7 different countries, okay? And we can get to that in a moment because there's a lot of holes in that logic. And secondly, he is giving Christian refugees the right to come in. but if you're Muslim, you cannot. So I just want a reaction. What do you guys think?
From my perspective, it's your crazy uncle that watches Fox News and listens to right-wing radio all day long is now the president of the United States. So setting aside the moral and ethical issues with this and how it's a violation of the Constitution, let's just talk about just pretty much objectively why this could be a problem for the United States. So shoot to the other side of the world. I don't know if he's quite aware, I'm pretty sure he's not, that there are hundreds of thousands of Muslims fighting along the side of American troops right now, right? So we're still trying to beat ISIS out of Syria. Now, how exactly is that going to play when he's making these comments not only about Muslims, but also about taking Iraq's oil? What happens now at this point? I mean, the whole narrative, I don't think they're aware of this, but the whole narrative, the way that ISIS and Al-Qaeda and any sort of Middle Eastern extremist ideology, it's all wrapped around one thing. It's that Americans are imperialists and they want to come here and steal your oil, right? And now what we're doing is we're proving that true. That's been the reason why even Obama understood. Why did he not want to use that term, radical Islamic jihad, right? Because then it proposes us versus them rather than just being extremists. It's just a stylistic thing. There are going to be consequences to this, and it's absurd. And why is nobody saying, okay, I got it, use that as campaign rhetoric? But this is a serious problem. You are proposing the West versus Islam.
Yeah, well, it really sort of not just ignores, but totally obliterates any sort of strategy for the winning of hearts and minds, which is where actual change is going to come from. Because like Michael was saying, it's a matter of they really feel like they have reasons to hate us, and what we're doing now is giving them reasons to hate us. But I think it's important to recognize in part why Trump is following through with this sort of extreme action and a lot of others is because it fuels his narcissistic ego of getting a response from those people who support him. It's a thing that he said sort of off the cuff and in an extreme sort of way during the campaign, I think all the way back before he was even considering the idea that he might actually be president, when he was just doing this for attention or a publicity study. He's like, oh, we have to ban all Muslims from entering the country. And he got a reaction from it. And so now that he's president, he wants to continue that reaction. He wants to continue the high from that. And so he's following through on some of these things that everybody was saying, oh, well, he'll never do that, but they didn't really recognize why he was saying it and why he would have a compulsive need to follow through with it.
Zaki, you have young children. Have your sons asked you anything about this? Have you had to explain any of this to them at this point in your life, or at this stage and everything that's unfolding?
It hasn't come up per se. Not specifically with the executive orders of this week. And I mean, I do my best to shield them from a lot of what's going on, which is difficult, because I mean, I was thinking about this yesterday about how I'm an adult, or adultish anyway, and all the vitriol and everything that gets tossed around about Islam and Muslims, I'm able to, make a separation between sort of political nonsense and not taking it personally and, trying to solve problems. But I realize that, for my kids, my oldest two, they're 10 and 8, and so they're sort of growing up in the crucible of all this, and it's stuff that genuinely worries me, if Donald Trump gets reelected, then my oldest would be 18 by the time he leaves office. He will become a man in this time under these circumstances, and that's really troubling to me.
You've said that before, and the last time you said it, I believe was the last time you were on the show, and it resonated with me. But today, that really got me, because I think some of our worst fears are coming true. I'll be honest with you guys. I didn't think it would be this bad this quickly. I thought maybe over time. This first week has enough nastiness in it that I thought this would be stretched out over maybe at least 6 months.
Well, I think what it is that you've got the people that are surrounding him, the Steve Bannons of the world, who understand that, by the way, we've got a really small window. I mean, they say obviously
exactly right.
You've got 100 days, right. And they're like, well, we got to get going like right now before everyone starts figuring all of this out. Because just look at even the early reaction of it. But it is nerve-wracking because most presidents have to go slow. But all we can do is hope that there is enough of a groundswell right now for people to go into congressmen's offices, call their congressmen, senators, everything in the world, because that's the only thing you can do at this point to slow them down.
One thing I've been saying since the election is that, the great thing about our system is we have these brake levers built in every 2 years. and that allows for the opportunity to pull back from potentially catastrophic changes. But the flip side to that is that doesn't mean that there can't be a lot of damage done in the interim. Some of the damage is a lot harder to reverse. Now, the reality is that this refugee ban / Muslim ban, let's call it what it is, even if the directive is reversed after the, whatever, the 90 days or whatever, the ramifications of
right.
what the wreckage that it leaves behind. I mean, if you read the stories about these people who are arriving here, they've been through 2 years of vetting. They're going to see their families again. They're going to see their children again. And now, for no reason other than the stroke of a pen by this demagogue who doesn't have the intellectual sophistication to understand what he is doing. All he has is Grima Wormtongue whispering into his ear. Just by the exigency of that, families are being torn apart permanently. I mean, I can't imagine the idea of being in another country and not being able to see my kids, and being so close, being hours away from seeing them, and then just like that, being told, no, you have to go back all the way across the world.
The whole extreme vetting thing and how he uses that word extreme vetting, even though it's such a dumb term, can you at least point out the simple fact that the level of vetting that these people already go through, like what Zaki just said, we're talking about 2 years it takes. They do this really, really deep look into your history, long interviews, on and on and on. And somehow, I don't even know what in the world possibly the change. What is it that they're expecting to happen, with the more extreme vetting?
They're not.
Yeah, they're not.
There's no. It's just like they're saying we need to do more against ISIS, but they don't know what we're currently doing against ISIS or what more would actually look like. And just to touch on something that Zaki was just saying, it's the stroke of a pen, and it can destroy families and lives in the short term, but it also really damages our relationships all across the globe, not just with Muslim countries, but with other countries. And that damage to those relationships is a lot longer lasting than just the media attention that Trump gets for holding up the executive action and reading it in that weird staccato voice that he's got.
We were all talking about this off mic a few moments ago as well, is that there are some detainees right now at Kennedy Airport that were on their way here from Iraq. And now through this executive action, while they were literally in air, they landed and were detained. They have family that is here waiting for them. Is this what we're about? Is this the country that we love and grew up in? I don't recognize it right now.
Yeah, well, hopefully that gets the media attention that it needs to, and people can actually recognize what the human factor is to these sorts of extreme policies, and that way people can actually start to make a change and start to say, oh, maybe what we're talking about here isn't necessarily the best way to go.
All right, Zaki, I want to get your reaction to this, sir.
Yeah.
So Trump has put a freeze on these Muslim countries, right? But here's a twist, all right? So it appears that none of these on this list have had any radical Islamic terrorists that have killed Americans on American soil since 9/11. Or even before 9/11, for that matter. These are the countries so far. We have Syria, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Yemen, Iraq, Sudan. All right? Now, there is not any indication that anybody from any of those countries have come here to harm us in any way. Yet, if you look at Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Lebanon, and Russia and Pakistan, there's some at least legitimate anecdotal things you can pull from those. I mean, the Boston bombers were from South Russia.
Right.
So what is going on with that? It's one thing that we talk about how deplorable this is, and it is. But even from a strategic standpoint, even if you just want to say, well, under the umbrella of accepting this as logic, fine. Okay, let's play with that for a moment. Let's crawl under that umbrella together. Now all of a sudden I'm still getting wet. I'm still getting wet because I'm not protected by anything, because none of this even makes any damn sense. None of these countries have anything to do with what he's even implying. So what's going on with that?
I mean, it's the appearance of making progress on an issue that he campaigned on, while actually, you're just moving the furniture around. Because obviously our country has financial ties to Saudi Arabia, so you know that if he were to institute a ban like this against Saudi Arabia, there would be real financial hardship that our country would endure, but more specifically, he would have to endure because he has a financial relationship. Remember, and he hasn't divested himself of any of his businesses, so there's always that going on.
He gave it all to his kids. I mean, that's good enough.
Yeah, in that case.
And the pushback on that, to play devil's advocate, conservatives have said this on our Facebook page and to me on Twitter, that but these are all allies of the U.S., these countries. I'm not implying that we should ban any of these people, first of all.
Right. Well, and in all honesty, I mean, I think in a sense, engaging this argument on that level is itself erroneous because it gets into that. Because the truth is, in a much broader sense, we have to ask, as you just alluded to, Rick, why are we doing this at all when it's not going to solve the problem, regardless of whether it's these countries or, hey, let's shuffle the deck, these countries. Well, it doesn't matter because big picture, it's fundamentally discriminatory and it's harshly punishing the people who need the most help.
The most help, right. Well, all it does is mollify irrational and ignorant fear amongst a certain population here in the U.S. That's all it does.
And it's the inevitable result of electing an internet troll or your ignorant uncle to the highest office in the world.
Right.
We elected a walking Fox News comment thread.
It almost feels like it's unfair, like, as the difference between like maybe American progressives and not all, but for the most part, the current conservative movement in the U.S., they're not burdened by having to stick to, like, not just facts, but having to work things out and having to learn about things, right? Hey, on the surface, you know what? Honestly, if I don't think anything past it, this kind of makes sense because let's block people from extremist countries from coming here. If I think no further, that makes sense. If you take it just one step further, peel back just a couple of layers and having just something beyond the surface level understanding of this, then it all completely falls apart. What happens in those people's minds where they're like, yep, that makes sense, and they don't think about it anymore? It's maddening to me, and it's almost like it's not fair. I am stuck with the burden of having to learn more about it and have that understanding. You're comfortable being ignorant.
Yeah, it goes to something we saw a few months ago where people on the left were told, oh, you're in your bubble, you got to get out of your bubble. That was a famous thing shortly after the Trump election, right? And I'm kind of like, look, I'm very comfortable that I'm not in a bubble, and I know with absolute certainty that many people who cast their vote uncritically for Trump are very much in their bubble, and this is a perfect exemplification of that because it's something that is like 8 degrees removed from their frame of reference, and so it's not something they need to think about.
So I was just on the call with Matt Mackowiak, and he and I had a nice chat about this, and he had an interesting perspective. I appreciate the fact that he was very heartfelt in terms of especially the people that are being detained at the airport right now. And his view was we could have gone about this a lot better. There's some disagreements, obviously. I don't think we needed to go about this at all, but that's okay. I will take the view of someone who's genuinely concerned about terrorism and maybe fear drives him a little more than it should. I'm not accusing Matt of that. I'm just talking about in general. But there's one specific thing that's unforgivable. I mean, really it all is, but I can't even it's a non-starter of a conversation with somebody for me on this. And Zaki, I know you have to run, but if I could just get your thoughts on this just real fast. So
yeah,
I mentioned it earlier, and this is the part that had me in tears last night, and I was talking to my wife about it, is that we now have a president who's saying, if you're a Christian, though, there's an exception. I'm going to put you on top of that priority list and get you in because you've been treated terribly. Now, I would like for our new president to understand that 91% of ISIS victims are Muslims, and these aren't Muslims that are in a rival gang that are two sides of the same coin. These are innocent civilians. I also would like to point out that in a Pew Research study, last year alone, we let in just shy of 39,000 Muslim refugees, and then we also, by the same number here, just a little over 37,000 of Christians. Now, you think about how many more Muslims are in that part of the world, particularly in places like Syria, where what is the Christian population there? Is it 5%? I don't even know. It's low. That's you look at that proportionally. That's not only an even playing field. You could probably argue that more Christians were let in, proportionally speaking, by percentages. So what the hell is that about?
I'll tell you what it is. It's about propagating the fallacy that by the mere fact of a Christian living among Muslims, they are persecuted and thus in need of extrication.
That's a good point.
I agree, but it's not even true in terms of who we let in. That's the thing. It's like I'm sorry. Go ahead.
We're far past the realm of truth. We're in alternative facts now. Right? I mean, this is about the message that's being put out, and I want to encourage you all to take the long view here, because as optimistic as I fundamentally am, I feel like he is putting things into the ether that, a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now will be extremely damaging, because it's about normalizing the notion that Muslims are the encroaching, quote-unquote, other that needs to be staved off and needs to be cut out of our midst. And my worry, my fear is that what we're seeing now with these immigration actions, by virtue of the complete lack of pushback, certainly from the Republicans controlling Congress, is allow for that to be normalized by virtue of, it's people from over there. But slowly but surely, we will see its tendrils, get further and further inside. So next is going to be people who are in the country on visas. Next is, I don't see a way this stops until people make their voices heard and say this is not remotely acceptable.
I think it's going to require people on the streets, and somehow hopefully that gets to the Muslim world, is seeing all the demonstrations and everything against it. How else do we send the message? By the way, the American people are not behind this. It's hard to say, but the American president does not represent the values of the United States of America.
No, well, unfortunately, all that matters is the actual policy and actions and the way it affects the people in those countries. They don't care if they see some of us marching in the streets. I think that they're not going to see that to begin with. But ultimately, what matters is how what we do as a country affects what's happening to them as people.
That's very well said, Jeremy. Now, Zaki, I know you have to run, so you can't stick around to the end of the show. We will miss you, but do you mind giving us your famous prediction on your way out?
I said it last time. I'll say it again.
Pain, Clubberlang, pain.
God help us.
That you could just use that one from here on out all year. It'll be more and more relevant with each episode. Zaki, we appreciate you so much, and please come back to chat with us soon. Okay?
Thanks again for having me.
Thanks, Zaki.
Take care, man. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, gentlemen, so it's just us, the Left Shew team here. Oh, boy. So, guys, it's been a rough day for me. Rough 24 hours. This whole thing with what we just discussed has made me sick. So there's not much of a segue here because all of this makes me sick. But let's talk about our neighbor. And I say our neighbor because we're in Texas and California. This affects our two states as much, if not more than anybody. Our new president is basically declaring a trade war with our friendly neighbor. We're talking about a 20% import tax that he's now proposing, and I understand that he supposedly have backed off on it. Just the fact that he would put it out there to cause controversy. Because we'll spend that much more on tequila and Coronas, this will somehow pay for his bullshit wall. We are looking right now, they're talking $15 to $20 billion. That's I don't even know where they're getting that projection because I'm getting reports that it could be up to 50, 60. But here's an interesting thing. The wall that needs to be built is over 2,000 miles long. The Berlin Wall in 1961 cost $25 million. That's $200 million in inflation, and it's just a smidgen of the size of what we have to build. It's just a speck.
On flat terrain.
On flat terrain, right. And if you do the math on that, my calculator explodes. So here's my question to you guys, and let's just open this up and have a discussion. First of all, is this wall going to get built? And secondly, if it does, what are the ramifications of this wall being built in terms of our relationship with Mexico in the next 5 years, 10 years, tomorrow? What do you guys think?
Well, I don't know if the wall is going to get built or not. I certainly don't think it's going to be completed, but I think there's going to be some sort of dramatic starts to it for image purposes and making it look like something is actually happening. I think ultimately there's not anything about it that isn't damaging to our relationship with Mexico and the Mexican people. I really think that it costs jobs, it costs people, their own livelihood. It creates a feeling of America as, holding ourselves above and wanting to eliminate the possibility of any of the great unwashed coming in and affecting the great life that we have here in the U.S. So I don't think that there's anything positive that could possibly come from actually completing the wall.
And just to take it from there, I agree. So here's what I think they're going to do, right? And it's so wild. It's very difficult to try to figure it out from day to day. I think that somehow in a couple of places, they are going to erect a wall, right? But it's not going to cover the entire southern border. It might be just in a couple places because there is some legitimate issues, right, in some areas, and people sneaking across and causing a lot of issues with landowners and everything over there. So I think that they're going to get it on a technical sense, but no, you can't have a $20 billion wall on our southern border when almost something like 75% of the bridges in North America are on the edge of imminent collapse. We could do no infrastructure spending, but oh God, we got to get that wall.
Right.
I mean, I can't imagine. And how long is that really going to last? Because I think that he doubles down on things because I think that nothing could be worse for him than being seen as going back on his word. You know what I mean?
And Jeremy, I was reading an interview with your new Attorney General yesterday, and I'm going blank on his name, so forgive me. But anyway, he was talking about how, first of all, he's going to fight this tooth and nail. And that you have to meet certain standards, environmental standards, to
right.
come on California property to build this wall. And furthermore, there's a lot of private property along this 2,000-mile pathway. A lot, not just in California.
Well, Trump doesn't have any problem with eminent domain, right? He's
right.
Certainly...
Well, I guess my point is this: is that it is a colossal nightmare from every angle that you look at this. And the one thing I will say, hear me out on this. I'm giving him credit, but not in a good way, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's an oxymoron or not. One thing I will say about this guy is he's taking every campaign promise, no matter how nefarious it was, and he is full throttle going forward trying to get all this stuff through. All of it. Muslim ban, wall, trade, you name it, everything.
Well, that's because, like I said earlier, he's looking for that rush. He's looking for the high of adulation that he gets from those people who are his most ardent supporters. He thinks that that's all he really has to answer to, that he just has to please those people who give him praise, because that is what he's fueled by. He's a narcissist, and all he's looking to do is fuel his ego. He doesn't really care about the consequences. He literally thinks that everyone and everything, including the office of the presidency, is subservient to his needs and his ego. He plays it up like, oh, I'm doing this for the American people, but he's not. It's only about serving his ego. That's it.
Well, with the exception of Russia, and we'll get to that in a little bit, I'm not seeing pushback from members of his own party. On Russia, yeah. I am, for sure, and we'll talk about that later, but I'm not seeing pushback on any of this stuff. People are talking about this wall. They're talking about... Speaker Paul Ryan was on some show yesterday. I can't remember now, but it doesn't matter. And he was talking about how he actually thinks that the 20% import tax is a good idea, that we should do it. Now, a Republican would not have said that 2 years ago. They wouldn't have said that a year ago.
Yeah, they would never say it.
They would never say that.
If a Democratic president had proposed any sort of tax or adjustment of trade policies with any country, that's a violation of the free market, right? But in my mind, I think there's two things. One, there's some word floating around, and I don't want to give too much credence to it, but the idea that the Republican leadership and the Republican establishment is just sort of biding its time and placating Trump for as long as they need to until they can find some way to force him out and sort of Trojan horse Mike Pence into the Oval Office, which doesn't sound like all that far-fetched a conspiracy theory to me. I think other than that, though, there has to be a point where, I think the vast majority of elected representatives actually do have America's best interest at heart. So they can look at these things and recognize that maybe this is not the best way to go about it, and certainly the man who's doing them is behaving in an erratic and unpresidential way. So I think ultimately there's going to be sort of a crisis point they come to of a crisis of conscience where they have to push back and they have to say this isn't going to work, because they can't really take all that stuff. If they're really just willing to accept all of this stuff just so that they get, a Supreme Court nominee who loves guns, that says a lot of really unsavory things about the actual moral character of those people that I'm not really necessarily willing to say.
Well, I think historically that's where I want to believe it, but I'm still not quite sure, because you'll think back any time that you had, whether it was an awful dictator, anything like in history, you're like, what in the world was the rest of the government doing that they were so complicit with this? They're like, okay, let's just get it going. Now we're seeing it in real time in our lives. Like historians will even look back even at these times, but to see how long that they tolerated it. And now I see obviously what it is. That, even and I'm, listen to Matt, and Matt is somewhat even I changed his tune a little bit, just simply because they see it as, we need policies pushed through, right? This is our chance. It sucks. We're stuck with this, but we can tolerate this because at least we'll get all these conservative principles through. Because now it's no longer about, are these good ideas? It's just that is what our side does, and so we really got to push for it, because we don't take this advantage. Hey, it might not happen in our lifetimes, or it might not happen the times when we were in government.
And you think about this time in the Obama administration, what they were doing with their power was Obamacare, healthcare. One thing, this is endless. This is a
stimulus.
There's stimulus as well. That's true. Sorry, that's a major one. I shouldn't have forgotten that one. There's two, but there's 5 here. And
well, there's a lot to be said about the difference in the actual benefit of the varying policies between Obama's first 100 days and Trump's first 100 days and how they'll actually benefit and affect the American people. But I think that...
Yeah, he course-corrected a downward economy. I mean,
absolutely. And
right?
I think what Michael was saying about the strategy of the Republican establishment now is probably true, but it's relatively myopic because ultimately the way they're doing it and the man they have guiding the ship is going to undermine those policies in the long run and make sure that they're short-lived. I mean, God forbid that in 4 years we get Donald Trump again or even Mike Pence, which might be worse. But I think that there's going to be a negative pushback eventually, and hopefully it just comes fast enough.
Let's talk about voter fraud. Our new president is still making these claims that he would have won the popular vote if 3 million illegals did not vote for Hillary Clinton. Now, he also is calling for an investigation. I put on Twitter the other day, if he's so definitive about it, why the investigation? Why not just present the evidence as you have it now? That's one. This whole thing is nonsense, but that's just one thing.
Right. Well, if 5 million people voted illegally, then we need a new election.
We need a new election.
He should be calling for a new election.
I agree. Let's overturn this thing. I agree. It was voter fraud.
And this guy's actually a Texan, Greg Phillips, founder of Vote Stand. Did you guys happen to catch his interview? He was on Chris. Is it Cuomo? Is that how he's properly?
I think it's Cuomo.
Cuomo on CNN. I like him, by the way. He's tough. But it was absolutely insane. Chris Cuomo was saying, so where's the evidence of this? He's, well, I don't have it to present, but I know for sure that 3 million voted illegally. Right. Okay, so where's the evidence? Oh, well, we'll have that for you in a few months. He says, so you're midway through your investigation, but you're making these claims. Anyway, if you haven't seen
it... He made these same claims, by the way, 3 days after, the election. So, I mean, there's, no data.
Yeah, no data. This was all based on early voting. It was all nonsense. And then
poll watching. They saw brown people go into the polls.
Literally, that was something they said. My uncle saw Mexicans vote. I mean, that's no BS. That's actually what they said. And then Trump tweets out, looks forward to seeing final results of Vote Stand. Greg Phillips and crew say at least 3 million votes were illegal. We must do better. Our president is taking a conspiracy theorist blogger and making these incredibly awful claims that 3 million people voted and that they all voted for Hillary and they were all illegal.
Right. Well, that's just status quo for how Donald Trump works.
But he's now the sitting president.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the tip of the iceberg. He's talking to InfoWars. Right. I mean, that's like Alex Jones. Remember that guy? 9/11 is an inside job. George Bush administration is behind 9/11. Sandy Hook didn't happen. Lizard people. You hear Bill Maher joke about that. Literally, they believe in lizard people. Like every weird conspiracy theory. And I think it was just last week, Donald Trump, the sitting president of the United States, talked to him like he's a regular newsman. That means that he believes it. He is the most extreme. He is your crazy uncle, but not like kind of the good one that watches Fox News, but watches InfoWars. Oh, my God. President.
And just a side note, Alex Jones is also in Texas. Our dear listeners, Texans are not crazy, I promise. Hey, on that note, hey, Michael, did you hear that Alex Jones actually is getting press credentials at the White House? I hope that's a BS rumor, right?
I have not heard that, but I've been actually thinking of that exact thing because, remember, they're saying they're going to change, who actually has access to the briefing room. And Breitbart's going to be on there. And if it's going to be InfoWars, oh, my God, legitimizing that sort of, information. Seriously, is this, how far can we go? Good God.
And I would also like to point out one more thing, and you're right, that's rock bottom. You're absolutely right. If Trump also is saying in the same breath that I would have won the popular vote if I would have campaigned for it, and then turns around and saying, but the only reason I lost is because 3 million illegals voted for Hillary. Why would he have campaigned differently then? It's just it's so full of hoes and so ridiculous. So
So he chose the state of California that there was 0% chance of him. No, excuse me. She chose the state of California, and let's jack it up there. But all those swing states, now we won't do we won't do the fake voting in those districts.
Let's send 3 million of them to California, but not 50,000 to Michigan.
Right, exactly. Yeah, let's just shove California down his throat.
Right,
we'll teach you a lesson.
We're looking for a moral victory there. We're really looking to run up the score in California.
Guys, that's a great point. So now we have a president who doesn't want to investigate. He wants to investigate the illegal aliens voting, but he doesn't want to investigate the hacking of Russia. Now, I know Russia is a real hot button for you, Jeremy. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just intellectually disingenuous. But again, that's par for the course with Trump, and there's a lot to talk talk about there. But I think that the important thing with Russia is not just to remember what about Russia, but it's just to remember that the Russia thing is a thing, because just like during the campaign, every new day brings a new ridiculous statement or tweet from Trump and a new ridiculous action, and it's easy to forget about what happened the day before. But I think that some things that may be okay, some things we do need to focus on what's new, but we really have to make sure that we're not forgetting about a lot of this stuff, because he's only been in office a week. We've had a month or just a little over a month and a half or 2 months since he was elected, and so many things have happened in the interim that it's hard to focus on any one thing, and there are actual things that we need to focus on, and the Russia connection is one of those. So I just hope that the media and that there are people working on investigative journalism that's really digging into the facts, and I think Anonymous said that they were looking at stuff, and now WikiLeaks has apparently been pissed off by the Trump administration, and so they're looking into some of it. So I just want to make sure.
We're all going to turn around. We're going to be happy with WikiLeaks now.
Yeah.
They're going to be right. You guys were happy with WikiLeaks
I don't want that
before.
to be the new normal. I want us all as Americans to not like any of it. None of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to fall into the same Republican trap of, well, it shouldn't matter where the information came from. If it exposes corruption, it exposes corruption. But that's a myopic viewpoint, and it's not even a good way to go about things, because you don't know what the agendas are of the people exposing the things that they say they're exposing, or whether or not the information is actually factually accurate. I mean, there's very incredibly serious dangers to the way that we're going about things and to the way that Trump actually made his way into the White House, and we have to stay focused on those things, and the Russia connection to that is an important one. There may be nothing there, but there's more there than there is for the idea of voter fraud and 33 million illegals voting, or the conspiracy theories that they were pushing about the Clinton Foundation,
or that Barack Obama wasn't born in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely.
Trust me, there's a lot more there, friends.
Right.
If you're willing to entertain that, then this is really juicy, because this is coming from legitimate intelligence services.
Yeah,
so if you're listening right now, you obviously heard my chat with Matt Mackowiak earlier, and he, he's one of the good guys, which, most conservatives are. We don't hate conservatives on this show. My God, I'd lose half my friends and most of my family if I didn't like conservatives. But one of the things I also really liked that Matt talked about was that he is actually, as a conservative, and you guys know him, he is really nervous about all this stuff going on with Russia. And he says that he does not want Trump to pull back these sanctions, and he's afraid it might happen. And what that could do, the ramifications of that could be detrimental to our standing in the world, because, and I pointed this out, is that it is not a sign of diplomacy. That will be a sign of weakness, and the Kremlin will just exploit that. And that what we're looking at right now is we need tougher sanctions. We need to respond more harshly. You have Senator Lindsey Graham, you have John McCain, you have many, many others that are echoing the same sentiment, and we have a president who gets on the phone, I believe, guys, on Monday.
We could be a nuclear holocaust by Monday. Things are moving so fast.
This show might be so outdated by Monday, we might have to pull it. But, yeah, we're in World War III. Gorbachev thinks we're probably going to be, side note.
Well, that's because we're lining troops on the Russian border, but that's another topic.
They're on the phone on Monday. That's Pence and Trump and Putin. What Jeremy, what do you think is going to... Do you think he's going to pull sanctions? Do you think he's going to tighten sanctions? What do you think he's going to do?
He's definitely not going to tighten sanctions. I think that, there are probably sanctions that might not be lifted, but I think there are definitely some sanctions that relate to Russia's ability to produce and export oil. And I think that, every indication from the Trump administration all the way to who he selected for Secretary of State suggests that that's a direction that he's going. Now, ultimately, I don't think Trump really displays any loyalty or allegiance to anybody, and I think that there's a possibility that, I don't want to get too much into a conspiracy,
Do it. There's actually evidence to back it up.
But, it's possible that some quid pro quo promise was made with, through back channels between the Trump campaign and the Russian Putin administration of what might happen and what Trump was going to do if Putin helped with this or that. And I think it's possible that Trump could just pull the rug out from under him and think, hey, I got what I wanted, screw you, you can't tell anybody about this anyway. And that could have just as disastrous effects as Trump actually following through with what it is that Putin wants to do, because there's no way Putin doesn't have more information, right? So if he doesn't get what he wants, then he's just going to go further down the road of what he already wants to do, which is generally just cause chaos within the American democracy, which that's his ultimate goal. He's not really even trying to prop up Trump. He's just trying to cause chaos within the American democracy.
Well, it was just like he got to that point where as soon as he saw, oh my goodness, Trump actually has a little momentum. He's saying some good things about us. Not to mention I have a piss tape, but maybe. But he's like, well, this is going to be a home run. He does want to cause chaos. He does want to loosen democracy, make people lose faith in their government and everything over here. But I would still bring it back. Let me ask kind of the question, and this will be just a rhetorical question, but just to say, we've said this before. So if Trump is not compromised by the Russian government, why is he doing everything in the world to look like he's compromised by the Russian government? So that question's out there, but like really ask yourself that question, because that is one thing that literally could make him, like, because of all these things going on, make him seem illegitimate. A good political move would simply be to actually, let's wait about 6 months. Even if you, if he wasn't, let's just wait 6 months and then we'll maybe start warming back up to Russia. We'll say a couple of tough things just to like convince the public, look at us, see, we are against them. He's not doing that. It makes no sense logically. It doesn't make any political sense. Like everything seems to be pointing to there is something wrong there.
And it's just
get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, it's ideologically inconsistent, because his whole justification for not saying negative things about Russia or Putin is, wouldn't it be great if we could have a positive relationship with these people? But then on the very next breath, he's totally undercutting everything he possibly can about China. So I don't understand why he thinks, we need a positive relationship here, but we don't need a positive relationship there. It doesn't jive. It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. So this next question is going to be a little strange because you guys have both made some pretty bold predictions, but let's end it here. This was a great discussion. This could go on we really need 5 shows for what's going on this week. So anyway, let's end it with our famous predictions. Michael Malloy, go first, sir.
Okay, so let's go with very relevant something since it's occurring right at this moment, and I may even be proven correct since this won't come out until Monday. The Muslim ban will be tested as soon as the refugees get to the airport in the U.S. By all the constitutional attorneys. It'll go immediately to the federal court and even the Supreme Court. And the Muslims at the airport will be able to enter the U.S. and will completely thwart all of the plans of the Trump administration of trying to ban people based on their religion.
I hope you're right. Jeremy Gorkley?
I think that Kellyanne Conway is going to end up being Donald Trump's White House chief of staff. I think that she's been angling for that for a long time. She probably wanted the job when he gave it to Reince Priebus, and I think that there's probably a growing rift between the Trump administration and the Republican establishment, and at some point, Reince Priebus is going to be forced to choose sides, and he's not going to be as loyal to Trump as Trump wants his chief of staff to be, and Kellyanne Conway is going to exploit that in an opportunity to move into the role herself.
I think that the Supreme Court nominee that President Trump puts forward in the next week or two will not go through, and I think we're going to be stuck with an 8-person court until God knows how long. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Left Shew Politics podcast. You can find us on Twitter @LeftShewPolitic, Facebook at facebook.com/LeftShewPolitics. Search for our channel on YouTube, and you can find us on the LSP website, LeftShewPolitics.com.